Welcome everyone to the next video in this series. This video will be handling Gradle Enterprise and our experience at Premise Data using the Gradle Enterprise solution to increase developer productivity, save engineering costs, and ship features faster. So welcome. As we start, what are some of the problems faced by engineering organizations today? The first one is inefficient collaboration in engineering when investigating problems. So you'll find that most companies don't have a system that enables them to collaborate in investigating problems and fixing those so that the team can be as productive as possible. Secondly, many teams face slow feedback cycles for developers when making changes to the code base. So you might find that your slow feedback cycles in terms of really long build times. So you find that you wait for a pretty long time before your build fails for you to get that feedback, and that really makes the developer experience not ideal. Thirdly, there's the lack of knowledge on how software is built in the organization. Sometimes you might find that people are building software, but that knowledge of how this software is built, how the build is running, how it integrates to your CI pipelines is not clear for all the developers or all the engineers on your team to know about. And finally, there's the high CI infrastructure costs. So you may find that these costs tend to skyrocket if your project is not structured in a way factoring in these CI infrastructure costs. So ultimately, there's a competitive disadvantage by shipping features slower than needed and with a lower quality than expected. And you might find that your competition will be beating you in terms of deploying software or features to users faster than you are, because you're being impeded by some of these problems. And one major one is that it also reduces developer satisfaction and motivation, because if your developers are working in an environment that's not enabling them to be as productive as possible, you'll find that their satisfaction and motivation dwindles over time. And retaining them as your staff or retaining them on your team becomes harder because they're not motivated to stay on the team or continue building the product. So Gradle Enterprise elevates developer productivity and reduces costs. So that's one of the key value propositions of the Gradle Enterprise tool by the Gradle team. And it does this by providing deep insights into what happened when the software is built. So whenever you're running your builds and builds are happening, the Gradle Enterprise tool aggregates all the different information and data about your builds and provides them as a high-level insights for you to be able to see what happened whenever you're building your software. So the next one is the acceleration of the actual building of the software. So Gradle provides certain build acceleration tools that help you increase the speed with which you build your software and also help you avoid having long build times so that developers can focus on churning out new features rather than waiting for long builds to complete. Next, it aggregates information on how software is built in the company over time. So the beauty of the Gradle Enterprise dashboard is that it brings all this information together, and you can be able to track this information and this data on how your software is built over time. So you're able to track if there are any regression issues that are introduced. You're able to observe that and fix for those over time. And finally, you're able to reduce the CI hardware utilization through faster and less building of software. All right, so you'll find that this is achieved when you have your builds building faster, where you integrate tools like the build cache or other build acceleration technologies, and also the less building of software by avoiding redoing work that's already been done once. So we'll dive deeper into this, and you'll see how each and every build acceleration technology works and how it improves your developers' productivity and their experience. So with Gradle Enterprise, you can ship high quality features faster and more often. So that's one of the great value propositions. And as we continue, this is the Gradle Enterprise technical overview. And from your screen, you can see how it fits into your project's build. So at the top, you have your version control system. And then below that, you can see the developers to the left, their particular workspace. And then there's the Gradle tool or the Maven tool. But in our case at Premise, we use the Gradle build tool. Then on the right, there's the CI pipeline, which has its workspace and the Gradle build tool as well. And then this plugs into the different tools that Gradle Enterprise makes available to us, which is the build scans, the build cache, and the test distribution. So if you want to understand and improve what happens in your builds, you use the build scans, and these are available on both CI and on developer machines. If you'd like to skip build work that has already been done before, you leverage the build cache, and this works on both CI and on developer machines. And finally, when you're running tests distributed across multiple machines, you can do this faster using the test distribution feature on Gradle Enterprise. And this is available both on CI and on developer machines. So the thing you need to keep in mind about the Gradle Enterprise is that it's an on-premise software as a service product that connects to every developer and CI machine building with Gradle, or Maven as well, depending on the build tool you're using. Gradle Enterprise collects data about everything a Gradle build execution does and touches. So it does this for all the builds all the time, whether it's on your local machine or your CI pipeline. And finally, Gradle Enterprise provides a cache that dramatically speeds up builds by reusing build and test output across the entire team. And we'll dive deeper into this in the next slide. So these are some of the productivity components that are provided to you courtesy of Gradle Enterprise. The first one being the build scans, which are a persistent record of what happened in your build, visualized in a web browser. And as you can see from the screenshot below, that's sort of what it looks like, and we'll get to that later in the video. Next is the build cache, and this stores and provides artifacts produced from previous build invocations to avoid work that has been done before. So your local build cache node and remote build cache nodes distributed geographically are available for the best performance. So for the caching system, you can leverage your local build cache on your machine, and then based on the structure of your team, if your team has members in different parts of the world, you can leverage the remote build cache nodes so that they can have a replicated cache node that's closer to them, so that they can pull in build cache artifacts from a node that's closer to them. So we'll also dive deeper into this later in the series. Finally, there's the test distribution, which takes your existing test suites and distributes them across remote agents to execute them faster. So these are the three productivity components that you can use to improve your developers' productivity and that of your team. So how is Gradle operated? So it's a minimal, non-invasive Gradle build configuration. It's hosted on servers on-premise, or you can use cloud technologies, whether GCP or Azure. And here at Premise Data, we use GCP. It can be deployed via replicated or in a Kubernetes cluster, and it can be operated by Premise Data operations team. So in our case, we have a security and infrastructure team who are in charge of this. But initially, when we were doing the Gradle Enterprise experiments, we're the ones who did the initial setup for the experiments, even before we got the license. But this has since been taken over by the infrastructure and security team. And finally, you're supported by the Gradle engineering team via some SLAs, and this is one of the best value propositions of having a Gradle Enterprise license, because you have access to the Gradle engineering team, and whenever you face any challenges, it's as simple as just sending them a Slack and they'll get back to you as soon as possible. You can have pairing sessions with them, and they can guide you on how to improve your build over time. All right, so at Premise Data, we just like to highlight a few ways in which Gradle Enterprise has helped us improve our developers' productivity. For starters, we've been able to accelerate the failure analysis and resolution on local and CI builds. So this was a big problem for us, because sometimes it wasn't clear what was causing the failures, and also just being able to have access to that aggregated data over time. So we've been able to accelerate the failure analysis and the resolution of issues, whether in the local and CI builds. And we've been doing this by collaboration on build issues via build scans, which has been very ideal for us. investigating the build failures via the build scans again, and also investigating slow builds via the build scans. So those are the three sort of highlights of the acceleration of the failure analysis and resolution bit. Next is the acceleration of the feedback cycle. This was big for us because our initial CI pipeline configuration wasn't ideal, and some of the tools were outdated. Our Gradle tools were like 2 years out of date, and as a result, you can imagine we weren't leveraging some of the up-to-date acceleration technologies that the Gradle team was making available to us. Next, there's the diagnosing and improving of the build cache performance, which is something we did with the experiments courtesy of the Gradle Enterprise team. And next, we got some insights for switching CI providers. So as part of our 1-year journey, we were able to switch over from Travis to GitHub Actions, and we realized that the Travis queue time was actually a large chunk of our build times, and that was just queue time waiting for Travis to spin up and then now execute the build. So out of the total amount of the build, the queue time, that waiting time, was taking a big chunk of our build times, and that wasn't ideal for us. That was actually hurting our build times. Finally, there was the enabling of the changes, and in our case, we had better observability, leading to more confidence in making changes to the build. So in the past, we didn't have confidence in making changes to our build because, for starters, we didn't understand it, and secondly, whenever you'd make any changes, the build would run for anything close to 30 minutes, sometimes 45 minutes to an hour. So you find that people weren't confident in making changes to the build, and people would just stay away from it. So right now that we have better observability into the build and how it works, we are confident in making changes and improving the builds. One thing that you need to keep in mind about the developer productivity space is that you just don't work on this once and it's fixed for good. It's something that you need to work on constantly and keep improving, so that you can ensure that your developers are having the best experience, especially with your builds, and that everyone is happy. Because when developers are happy, developers are productive, you're able to ship features faster to your users.